work hard, do everything right, and you'll be fine. But I don't feel fine. Did everything right, still feel like I'm losing. They gave me the path, but I don't feel like choosing. No choice. Say it's my life, but they already wrote it. I play my role, but I don't even know it. Don't know. They told me grades make the man, so I followed the plan. Every move calculated, trying to be what they stand. Smiles feel fake in the room, everybody compete. Nobody really learning, just trying to not be weak. You win, but you lose. You rise, but confused. Got the gold on your neck, but it feel like good news. I don't question, no questions, I just do it. They don't teach you, they just move you. Did everything right, still feel like I'm losing. They gave me the path, but I don't feel like choosing. Say it's my life, but they already wrote it. I play my role, but I don't even know it. I've been chasing validation, trying to feel what's missing in me. Every win feel temporary, why it never fixed me. Yeah, they say this is success, but it don't feel real. Every step that I take feel like signing a deal. So my time for a number, so my mind for approval. If I stop, I feel nothing. If I run, I feel brutal. No rest, no soul, no peace, just stress. Why win? Still hurt. Why shine? Still dirt. If I'm him, why I doubt? If I'm free, why locked out? Did everything right, still feel like I'm losing. They gave me the path, but I don't feel like choosing. No choice. Say it's my life, but they already wrote it. I play my role, but I don't even know it. It was never about learning, it was always control.
Hi YouTube, good morning from Toronto on a very muggy day. As you know, last night Trump ordered the bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, and this will mark the beginning of World War III. So I have both good news and bad news. The bad news is we are now approaching the end of the world. The good news is this morning I will tell you how the world will end. So I'm going to look ahead and ask the most pivotal question of this coming war, which is, will the United States use ground troops? And as we discussed many times before in previous videos, if the United States were to use ground troops, then they would lose this war. It would mark the end of the American Empire, and it would probably ignite the Second American Civil War. And I think most people would be in agreement that using ground troops would be a disaster for the United States, and the United States should avoid using ground forces to the best of its ability. That said, I'm going to use game theory to explain to you why they will still use ground troops against Iran, even though it's a really, really bad idea. In fact, it would be a catastrophe. Okay, so let's do some game theory analysis. In game theory, we look at the different players. Here would be Iran, Israel, the United States. And we ask 3 questions. The first question is, how do they themselves perceive the game? what game are they playing? How do they see themselves? How do they see their roles in this game? That's the first big question. Second big question is, what are their interests? What are their motivations? What are they trying to accomplish? What are their goals? And the third big question then is, given their role and given their interests, what is their optimal strategy in trying to achieve their goals? Okay, so given these three questions, we're going to look at how Iran, Israel, and the United States will play this game in this war. Okay, so Iran's probably the easiest to do, so we'll start with Iran. Iran perceives this war as the opportunity to achieve really important national strategic goals. The first is to create national unity and to further legitimize the authority of the regime. As you know, because of sanctions and because of mismanagement, because of corruption, this regime in Iran is not very popular. But if the Americans are coming to invade and overthrow the regime and sow chaos and destruction, then the people are going to solidly unite behind the government, no matter what government it is. Also, the Iranians see this as the best opportunity in a long time to finally destroy the American presence in the Middle East by forcing the Americans into a quagmire that they cannot extricate themselves from. As we discussed many times, supply issues in Iran will be a huge problem for the American military. They can get in, but it's going to be very hard for them to get out. And the third strategic national interest is to create global legitimacy by defeating the Americans, right? The Shia regime is trying to be the leaders of the global Muslim movement. And if they were to defeat the Americans in Iran, then they would become the de facto leaders of all Muslims in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia. So those are the three major national strategic interests of Iran. And now the question then is, how would Iran force Americans to invade? What is their optimal strategy in this regard? Because remember, the Iranians, they're not going to be able to beat the Americans in a conventional war. They don't have the technology, they don't have the weapons, they don't have the financing that the Americans do. So they're going to have to trap the Americans in Iran, encircle them, and cut off their supply lines and force a negotiated surrender. Okay, that's the optimal strategy of the Iranians. So why would the Americans be lured into attacking Iran on Iran's terms? Well, there's a concept in geopolitics, in political science, called the escalation ladder. And the idea of the escalation ladder is that before a full-blown war can start, there has to be a certain process of escalation. And in this theory, the Americans have something called escalation dominance, which means that the Americans can always choose to use nuclear weapons if they feel they are losing this war. They are the hegemon. They are the global hegemon, and the Iranians are the underdog. So in theory, what they teach you in political science is that the hegemon has the advantage of escalation dominance. What I want to show you today is actually this theory doesn't really work, because escalation dominance, what it does is it forces you into reactions that may be against your best interests. So let me use a metaphor. Let's just say there's a bully in a high school, and he's been bullying people for a year now, and he's the biggest guy in the school. He's really mean, and everyone's afraid of him. He has a reputation for being a thug, and that's why he's able to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Now let's just say that you're half his size. You want to start a fight with him. Well, you would think that would be against your advantage. But one advantage that you have in this fight is you can control the terms of engagement. You can calibrate your actions in order to elicit responses that are to the detriment of the bully. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if the bully punches you, Well, you have options. You can choose to go to the principal. You can choose to not do anything, or you can choose to fight back. Okay, you have some options. But if you were to punch the bully would have actually no choice but to punch you back. If he relents, if he compromises, then he loses all credibility in the school. So he has absolutely no choice in the matter but to punch you back, and punch you back harder than you punched him. And what this means is there are ways for you to calibrate your attack so that the bully is trapped. Okay, so for example, you might say some bad things about him behind his back, then he responds. And anyway, the point of the matter is, even though the bully is supposed to be the stronger player, he's forced by his reputation to respond in a certain way that you can control and calibrate. Same situation here with Iran versus the United States. The United States is a global hegemon. If Iran were to close off the Strait of Hormuz, if it were to attack Saudi Arabia, if it were to attack American bases in the Middle East, then the Americans must respond in a way that demonstrates escalation dominance. Okay, and so by slowly and methodically and steadily provoking the Americans in a way that seems fair and reasonable, then Iran can slowly force the Americans into evading Iran. Okay, it's going to be a gradual process, but the Iranians can do this. Remember, it's the Americans who first launched the first strike against the Iranians, and so the Iranians can now calibrate response in order to slowly trap the Americans in the Middle East. Okay, so from the Iranians' perspective, the optimal strategy is to force the Americans to use ground troops to invade Iran, and they can accomplish that by carefully calibrating responses in a way that forces the Americans to respond more harshly until finally the only option really is to use ground troops. Okay, that's the Iranian case study. Now let's look at the Israelis. Okay, the Israelis and the Americans seem to be allies in this war, but the reality is the Americans and the Israelis have divergent interests. America is the global hegemon, therefore it wants to be able to balance forces in the Middle East. Yes, it supports Israel right now, but if Israel were to become too powerful over time, then the Americans would start to back Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt. Okay, the Americans must maintain balance of power in the Middle East. The Israelis, on the other hand, want to be the dominant hegemon in the Middle East. There's something called the Greater Israel Project that among certain circles in Israel is an extremely influential idea. Okay, and the idea is very simple. They believe that in the Bible, Yahweh, their God, gave the promised land to Abraham. That's a covenant. The promised land, though, extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. That basically the entire Middle East is supposed to be what Yahweh promised Abraham. And there's a fanatical faction within the Israeli government that seeks to accomplish the promised land. And of course, if that were the case, then the main adversaries to this project would not be the Iranians or the Saudis. It would actually be the Americans, okay? Because to accomplish the Greater Israel Project, then Israel needs to remove America from the Middle East. So how can Israel do this? Well, let's just say, just hypothetically speaking, the Americans were to invade Iran with ground troops, and they're stuck there for years and years, and they get nowhere. Now the American empire collapses. The American people revolt against the invasion of Iran. They refuse to serve. They burn their draft cards, as they did in Vietnam. There's civil chaos. There's an emerging civil war in America. And now the American military is forced to retreat from the Middle East. What would happen in that situation? Well, the moment that the American empire dies, the empire of Israel is born. Why? Because controlling the Middle East, the American military controlling the Middle East is called CENTCOM, Central Command. They have bases, they have weapons, they have soldiers. If the American nation were to retreat from the Middle East, it does not mean the American military goes away. All it means is the American military will now become absorbed into the nation state of Israel, making Israel the de facto hegemon of the Middle East. Okay, that's the long-term play of Israel. It does Israel absolutely no good to defeat Iran. They need to both defeat Iran and America. The best way to do that is to entangle both into a war that will destroy the militaries of both nations. Okay, that's the optimal strategy for Israel, and that requires the Israelis to persuade the Americans to use ground troops to invade Iraq. Okay, that's the Israel case study. Now let's look at America. Obviously, America does not want to use ground troops because the moment that Americans start dying in the Middle East, the moment that they institute a draft, it will create chaos in America. People are going to protest, people are going to revolt. Politically speaking, it will be a quagmire. What the American empire wants to do is use bombing, propaganda, and financing, and this is something we discussed last video, to overthrow the Iranian regime, the Ayatollah, and its mullahs, and install a more friendly regime that they can control. And in that way, they can control all the resources, the oil of the Middle East, and they can control global trade as well. And they have to do this as a response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which really put the American empire on the back foot, okay? So that's the optimal strategy of the American empire, okay? To overthrow the regime with as little casualties as possible, hopefully through bombing, decapitation strikes, killing the Ayatollah, special forces strategies, basically. Okay, but the person leading the American empire right now is Donald Trump, and if we look at what he wants, it's actually different from what the American empire wants. Let's ask ourselves a question: what game is Donald Trump playing? Does he really care about Iran? Does he really care about the Middle East? Does he really care about Israel and Zionism and the Greater Israel Project? My guess is he does not care. What he cares about is maintaining his political authority and power within the United States. He also cares about destroying the global elite that, in his mind, robbed him of power in 2022. Remember, for Trump, the 2020 elections were stolen from him. It's something that he's been adamant about for the past 4 years. In fact, he stews over it. So he wants to get back at the global elite who stole the American election from him, and also wants to make sure he stays in power. And that means destroying the global elite and the American empire. Okay, so it's really a struggle between America First, represented by Donald Trump, and American empire. Now you would think that this war between the American First people and the American empire would mean that Donald Trump would not use ground troops in Iran. But what better way to destroy the American empire than to give it all that it wants? Okay? What better way to destroy the American empire by making it arrogant, and by giving it all it wants, and by putting it in a situation that it cannot possibly win, right? So the idea is this. The idea is, at first, Donald Trump will seem to want regime change in Iran. And he may even commit ground troops. But as the American people start protesting, as there's violence and civil strife within America, as American soldiers start to die in Iran, as the global economy collapses, then Donald Trump's going to want to change his mind, right? But the American empire is fully committed to winning this war. It's all in. It refuses to surrender. And now a conflict emerges between the American empire and America first. And Donald Trump can now aggravate this tension by standing with America first over the American empire. And this would lead to a civil war. And you would think this is a bad thing, but a civil war and an unwinnable war in the Middle East are going to greatly enhance the power and authority of Donald Trump. So much so that he would probably be able to capture a third term. Okay, so it's really interesting in that all three major players, Donald Trump, Israel, and Iran, want America to use ground troops in Iran for their own selfish, individualistic purposes. And that's why I think ground troops will eventually be used in Iran. And I think what will happen is that basically all three players, Iran, Israel, and Donald Trump, will get exactly what they want. Israel will be able to remove America from the Middle East and become the Empire of Israel. Iran will unite the Muslim world behind its leadership. And Donald Trump will probably get his third term. Okay, that's what I see the upshot of this war being. Now, this raises a lot of questions though, right? I mean, if Israel becomes Greater Israel, and it becomes the Empire of Israel and dominates the Middle East, controlling oil and trade, then wouldn't the world unite against Israel? And unfortunately, that's part of the plan. That's part of the prophecy. Okay, and this is something that we will discuss in the next video. Because using game theory itself is not it's not enough to fully explain and understand what's going on in the Middle East. To fully understand what's going on, in my next video, I'm going to explain to you the religious ideals, the religious obsessions driving this war in the Middle East. I'm going to explain to you the idea of eschatology, which means the understanding of how the world ends. Basically, all the major players in the game, Iran, Israel, even to a certain extent the United States, the Christian Zionists within the United States, see this war in Iran as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. They really see this as the end of the world. And that's why this war is so scary for all of us. And so in my next video, I will reveal to you the religious dimensions of this war. Okay. Some other points before I conclude this video. Some of you have reached out in my last video and said that I should not reveal my public information. I shouldn't put my family in front of the camera. And you're absolutely right. Upon reflection, I want to thank everyone who voiced their concerns. Honestly, this is all new to me. I was a high school teacher teaching my students, and now I'm internet famous, and everyone's looking to me for some guidance as to this U.S.-Iran war. And I'm flattered, but I'm also overwhelmed by the attention. I'm an educator. I want to continue to educate people on how this war is going to unfold so that you will be better prepared. I see that as my mission. And so I'm going to continue making videos. I'm going to continue, as this war progresses, explain to you using game theory how this war might unfold. But I now understand that the internet can be a scary, crazy, insane place. So I'm going to have to be much more careful about my public profile, and I have to be a lot more careful about protecting my family. Okay, so I'm going to keep on making videos, but I apologize if you reach out and I don't really answer you. I'm being overwhelmed right now. I apologize if you reach out and you want to have coffee and I can't do it. Again, my focus right now is on studying this war, trying to figure out what's going on, and to the best of my ability, try to explain and clarify what's going on. Okay? So I will see everyone next time. Goodbye.
No way out. We stuck. We turn into one just to survive. No place to run, nowhere to hide. Nowhere to hide. Lost who we were just to stay alive. Stay alive. We turn into one just to survive. To survive. Yeah. Dropped in a place, we ain't know the rules. No map, no guide, we just had to move. Different talk, we don't speak the same, but we all feel fear, yeah, feel the same. Seen the safe, but the outside wild. If you want that food, you gon' risk your life. Every step feel like rolling dice. Every day we just tryna survive. At first we lost, didn't trust nobody. Now we locked in, like one body. We turn into one, just to survive. No place to run, nowhere to hide. Lost who we was, just to stay alive. We turn into one, just to survive. We made our own way, made our own code, made our own words, now we in control. Turn pain to power, yeah, we evolved. From nothing at all, now we standing tall. They pick the smartest, that ain't the way. They pick the one who would give they pain. Cut his hand, didn't say a thing. That's when everybody changed. No talk, just proof. That's how they choose. Years pass, now we think the same. Move fast, we don't need to say. One move, we react as one. That's how everything get done. One hurt, yeah, we all feel pain. One loss, yeah, we all take blame. Ain't no me, now it's all we. That's how proud really be. We turn into one, just to survive. No place to run, nowhere to hide. Lost who we was, just to stay alive. We turn into one, just to survive. Yeah. But that ain't just a story, ain't a story. But that's how they built it,
I hope everyone had a nice break, and welcome back to the end of the world. So as you know, World War III has started. The United States and Israel have started to attack Iran. And we are now in the 4th day of this war. And we can expect this war to last for many weeks, possibly also for many years. But I promise you that after this war is done, the world will never be the same again. So what we will do these next few weeks is use game theory and understand and analyze the geopolitical situation. And so I'm going to teach you the ideas, the theories, the techniques to understand the world around you and make predictions. And we can know if our analysis is correct because all this is happening in real time, and so we can test it against reality. All right, so let's go over some basic facts about what's happened so far. So in the early morning of Saturday in Tehran, the Israelis and Americans launched a decapitation strike against the Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran. Now, there are arguments and disputes about as to what happened. The Americans and Israelis said that they had real intelligence about where the leader was, and so they sent airplanes to just bomb the crap out of the place. They also had a spy who was able to record the body of the dead Ayatollah. And then this was announced. At first, the Iranians denied this, and the Iranians insisted he was still alive. But eventually, state media admitted that he did die in the airstrike. But then what they also said is that the Ayatollah, he's 86 years old, and he chose to die. He could have gone to Moscow, but instead he chose to stay in Tehran and die for his people. But not only that, but he died along many of his relatives. He died along with his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchildren. So many of the family died in this assault. Also, there's been reporting that he had prostate cancer. Okay, so he was going to die fairly soon as well. So what you need to understand first about the war is that even though the Americans and the Israelis claim great success in decapitating the leadership of the Iranians, from the Iranian perspective, this is a martyrdom, okay? And so the religion of the Iranians is called Shia Muslim. And this is different from Sunni Muslim. So Sunnis are the majority. They're about 9% of all Muslims in the world. The Shia have always been the minority. And as such, they've always been persecuted. So in the Shia faith, the core value, the force that binds everyone together and gives them purpose and meaning in life, that galvanizes them into action, is the idea of martyrdom, which forces jihad. To sacrifice yourself for your religion, sacrifice yourself for the common good. So think of the death of Khamenei as a sacrifice, a self-sacrifice, in order to motivate the Iranians in this war, okay? So that's the first thing you need to understand. That for the Iranians, this is not a geopolitical war. This is not an economic war. This is not a war of resistance. This is a jihad. Okay? It's a war against the great Satan to avenge their leader. They will fight to the death. All right? That's number one. Number two is this. Also that morning, when the Ayatollah was killed, the Israelis struck a school in the south of Tehran, killing about 150 school children. These are girls in primary school. And again, there's a lot of debate and argument as to what happened. The Israelis said that, first of all, the school was next to a military base. We were targeting the military base. And second of all, it wasn't us which struck the school. It was a air defense missile that went off course. Okay? And the Iranians insisted no. The Israelis purposefully attacked the school to kill the school children. And then you're like, why would the Israelis do that? But then these few years, well, we've seen what they've done in Gaza, in Palestine, to the Palestinians. And it's pretty consistent what the Israelis have been doing. All right? So this action against the Israelis, it's meant to show to themselves and the world that we are now all in. Okay? We've made the sacrifice. We are now committed to this war, to winning this war at all costs. And this action has also provoked the Iranian people to resist with their full might, okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. And again, we don't have complete evidence that it's the Israelis who did this, but given past actions from the Israelis, this is fairly consistent with what they've done, okay? So we can assume that this is something the Israelis did. Why they did this, what the purpose is something we will discuss as we move on, okay? It's very complicated. Next, I want to show you this. This is Dubai. And Dubai is considered one of the wealthiest, safest cities in the world. There are thousands, tens of thousands of Westerners who move to Dubai because it's clean, you don't pay any taxes, you make a lot of money. And there are great restaurants. And this is really the economic model of Dubai. It's one of the Gulf, the GCC countries, okay? The Gulf coastal countries. And for the longest time, Dubai had a really good deal because they were under the protection of the American military. So they didn't have to pay for defense. And then they were in the Middle East, which is the oil producing center of the world. And so they focus on aviation, they focus on logistics, they focus on finance, on tourism. They became extremely wealthy, right? I'm not sure if you've taken Emirates, one of the best airlines in the world. So their airport, Dubai Airport, is the busiest in the world. And Dubai, for the longest time, was flourishing under American protection. And Dubai said to the world, listen, we're like Switzerland, we're neutral. We don't want any involvement in any wars. We're here just to take care of our citizens, to make sure everyone has a good time, to make money. And then right after the war started, the Iranians attacked the GCC, okay? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, they attacked these places. And these places were like, what's going on? We're neutral, man. We're not involved in this war. And the airport was shut down in Dubai. At one point, the rich people in Dubai were willing to pay about $250,000 US just to get on a plane and get out of there. Okay? So, the reality is this. For the longest time, Dubai had a reputation for being safe, and that's why people moved their money there. Guess what, guys? After what the Iranians did, it's dead. Dubai as a city, in the long term, it is dead. Because you're a wealthy Westerner, you're not gonna move to a place where it could be attacked anytime by the Iranians. You might move to Singapore, you might move to Hong Kong, Japan, South America, but you're not moving to Dubai, okay? So the big question for us is, why did the Iranians do this? It's really the Americans who attacked you. Why go after the GCC? All right? And not only that, but they're escalating the attacks against the GCC. So this is something that we will look at very closely today. Well, the short answer is because these places, even though they pretend to be neutral, they house the American military. They allow the Israelis and the Americans to use their airspace to attack Iran from. All right? So this is Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is interesting, okay? Because I want you guys to remember this. But Bahrain will probably be one of the major centers of this conflict. Because, first of all, this is the American Fifth Fleet. All right? This is their naval base in the Middle East. And as you can see, the Iranians are attacking it with missiles. And it's being blown up. Bahrain is interesting because it has about 50% or even more, okay, Shia, which is the religion of the Iranians. But the people in charge are the Sunnis. And so what makes this strike really important from our perspective is, first of all, not only are the Iranians attacking US military assets, not only are they destroying the economies of the GCC, but they're also trying to ignite a religious war, right? Because you're Shia, you're loyal to the Ayatollah. And if he's dead, then you must, as a religious obligation, now commit jihad against your enemies. And it's no different in other religions where, listen, if you want to kill the Pope, the Catholics would be really angry at you and they would want to kill you, right? So now you have the Shia who will probably eventually arise, creating a revolution in Bahrain, okay? So I think Bahrain will be the first to fall. Dubai will probably go bankrupt, okay? But in the long term, we can expect the entire GCC area, including Saudi Arabia, to eventually collapse, okay? And so this is something we'll use game theory to understand. All right, let's continue. So we will know how this war develops just based on geography, okay? So this is a map. And this map, even if you don't really know the war, even if you don't know the participants, even if you don't know the weaponry, this map will tell you exactly how this war will progress. All right, so some certain things to keep in mind about this map. this is what we call this area, okay? Really small, it's 33 kilometers wide, okay? People can swim across it. It's really, really narrow, okay? This small area, guys, it's called the Strait of Hormuz, all right? And it's important because it's really the center of the world. This one area is the nexus, the pivot of the world. Let me explain why. First of all, from the GCC, you have 20% of all the world's oil flowing through this narrow strait. Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan. India depends on 60% of its oil from this area. China depends on 40%. Japan, 75%. Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan has said that, listen, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, we will run out of oil in about 8-9 months. The entire Japanese economy would collapse in 8-9 months if the Strait of Hormuz were to close. And guess what? The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? So we can expect that the entire global economy will suffer greatly over the next few months. All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is, okay, so the GCC sends oil across the Strait of Hormuz, and what do they get back in return? Food, guys. All right, so people don't appreciate the GCC, but it is really the linchpin of the American empire. Because what is the American empire? The American empire is the petrodollar. All right? The idea of the petrodollar is this. The US dollar is worth nothing. It's only valuable if people want it. But the GCC says that if you want oil from us, you have to pay us in US dollars. Okay? Then that is the basis of the value of the US dollar. So, if the GCC collapses, the American economy and the American empire both collapse at the same time. The problem, though, is that GCC is an artificial construct of empire. It does not exist naturally. Why? Because there's no food, there's no oil, no water. Okay, guys? No food, no water. So these cities are able to grow in the millions because of all these petrodollars flowing in. If you close off the Strait of Hormuz, there's no food coming in, right? They're all going to starve. How much food does the GCC get from overseas? 80%. 80% of all the food it consumes comes from overseas, that it imports. It does not grow by itself, it imports. All right? So the Strait of Hormuz is really key. And again, the Iranians will close it in order to strangle the global economy and therefore bankrupt the American empire. All right. Second thing you will notice is these mountains. These mountains is what we call Iran. All right, this is Iran. This is GCC. Okay, this is not a fair matchup, right? Because these are mountains. And what can you do in mountains? Well, you can hide rocket bases. You can hide drone bases. You can hide missiles. And that's the entire Iranian offensive strategy. All right. From here, they can hide missiles and drones from which to attack the GCC. And what are they attacking? They're attacking three things, right? They're attacking American military bases. American military bases. That's number one. Okay? Is it possible for the Americans to defend against these attacks? The answer is no. It's not. It's the silliest thing in the world. You have all these bases in the Middle East, but you cannot defend them against the Iranians. That's kind of strange. Okay, but that's number one. Number two is oil and energy. How hard is it to blow up an oil field with a drone? Not hard at all. Can you defend these oil fields? No, you cannot. All right? Number three, and this is most important, is water. Okay? You guys don't know this, but the GCC has little access to fresh water.
So the only way that it can produce water is what we call desalination plants, okay? These factories that take salt water and then through electrical chemical process, turn it into fresh water for the population to use. 60% of the water supply in the GCC comes from desalination plants, okay? 60%. Is it hard to blow up a desalination plant using a drone? The answer is, it's very easy. You understand? Okay? So you have this absurd situation where Iran is a mountain fortress where it can hide its offensive capacity, and the GCC, it's just this desert, this flat desert, and it is exposed to attack, and there's nothing it can do about it. Okay? So at any point in this war, the Iranians can choose to just destroy the entire GCC, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it. Okay? But Iran also has a weakness, okay? And this is fundamental. So Iran also has a water problem, okay? So for the longest time, they suffered a drought issue. Okay, just climate change. And so what the plan of the Israelis and Americans is destroy the water supply of the Iranians. Because the fortress, it is a mountain fortress, but it can also be a mountain prison as well, where people are trapped inside with no access to water. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, we're already seeing attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals. In the future, you'll see attacks on water supply, on dams, on reservoirs, on power plants. The point, the idea is to make Iran so inhabitable that the people will have to rebel against the people, or there'll be a refugee crisis in Iran. Okay? So as you can see from this map, this war, it is the end of the world. Okay? Both sides have the potential to destroy each other. It's really a question of how far do they want to go. All right? We can also say this is almost a game of chicken. Okay? We can blow each other up. How far do you want to go? And the problem is this. The problem is that the Iranians are Shia, which believes in martyrdom. And you've killed the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So they're willing to go very, very far. The GCC countries are Muslim, but they're materialistic. They love money. And also, most of the population are expatriates, foreigners. 90% of Dubai are foreigners. Guess what's going to happen if they suffer? They're going to run away. Okay? So this is not a fair matchup. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we will look at over the next few weeks. Will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers to topple the government? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two, nuclear weapons. If you're losing a war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III, okay? Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're going to use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. Okay? All right. You guys understand? All right. All right. Let's continue. Okay, so again, there are American bases all over the Middle East. And originally, these bases were established to protect them from basically their own people, okay? These are monarchies that were imposed on these nations by the Anglo-American Empire, the British first, and then the Americans came to support these monarchies. And so they provide defense. But then you're like, wait a minute here. I mean, didn't we just say that these American bases can't actually defend these people, that they're exposed? And the answer is yes, that's true. But remember that the American military was built during the Cold War. Okay? And the Cold War was a war between the Soviet Union and America. And so the Cold War was defined as something called MAD, mutually assured destruction, because both had nuclear weapons, okay? So they didn't really go to war against each other. And so in other words, these bases aren't really meant to defend these nations from other enemies. They're really meant to impose American authority in the Middle East, okay? And it's the idea of this. It's the idea that empire, it is really a image. It is a hallucination. It's just an idea. Empire is it's an aura of invincibility and invisibility, okay? If you fear it, then you obey it. But it's not really designed to fight a war, okay? And so that's why we have this absurd situation. And because there are so many bases in the GCC, that gives the Iranians the perfect pretext to attack them in order to destroy the GCC economy, which will destroy the American empire, right? All right, so this is how the war is shaping out, okay? So the red is the Israelis and the Americans, the yellow are the Iranians. And as you can see, the Iranians are attacking everywhere, primarily Israel, okay? But also, as you can see, a lot of focus on Bahrain and Qatar. And again, the intention is to destabilize the economy and the government. Okay? It's to try to get as much instability as possible. All right? Okay, and as you can see, the Americans and Israelis are focused on Tehran. And so the Americans and the Israelis use something we call shock and awe. And the very idea of shock and awe is you decapitate the enemy. If you cut off the head, the body will fall down, okay? The problem, though, is, again, the Iranians see this as a religious war. And so the Iranians have announced total war. Okay? And so what this means is that right now, command and control in Iran is decentralized. There's no one person telling everyone what to do. Every region has its own orders, has its own strategy. And so if you knock out Tehran, everyone else keeps on going. So if you take off the head, it doesn't change anything. Okay? But unfortunately, the Israelis and the Americans use this as a military doctrine. Military doctrine just means how you design your military for what purpose. And so even though the Americans seem like an invincible army, they are not equipped to fight a 21st century war against drones, against destabilization, against religious fanatics. Okay, they're just not. All right, but unfortunately, because of military doctrine, they're going to keep on attacking Tehran. Now, the great irony of all this is that the Iranians who would be most supportive of regime change, are actually in the cities, because they are educated, they're progressive. The people who are most fundamentally against you, will fight you to the death, are religious fanatics, the Shia militants, living in the rural areas, okay? So this is a really silly thing where you are actually destroying those who will most likely support you, and you're leaving alone those who are most likely to commit jihad against you. All right? Any questions so far, guys? Are you clear? All right, so another idea that I want you guys to understand is the idea of asymmetry. asymmetry. All right, so what is asymmetry? Asymmetry means that the two sides are choosing to fight different wars using different techniques because one is much stronger than the other, okay? America is a great empire. It has unlimited resources. It has the USD. It controls the world, right? Iran is a country that has been under economic sanctions for the past 45 years. It's poor. Its technology is very limited, okay? But as we learn in this class, actually, those nations that are poor actually have more energy. They're more open and they're more cohesive. All right, so let me give you an example. This is what we call the Shahad drones. Shahad drones. Each of these drones costs $50,000 at most, okay? At most. It can go as cheap as $35,000 US. But one of them is $50,000. As you can see, you can fit a lot of these drones to a truck that can go anywhere in Iran, and it can hide anywhere. All right? So the thing to understand is, first of all, these drones are cheap. They're easy to make. They make about 500 a day. Okay? And estimates are about there's 80,000 right now that the Iranians have. So they can go on for a long, long time. Okay? And one of these drones, again, can knock out a desalination plant. It can knock out an oil field. It can knock out a hotel. It can do a lot of damage. Okay? And it's easily transportable. You can hide it anywhere. You can use it from anywhere, okay? And that's what the Iranians are using as an offensive weapon. And how do the Americans defend against this? They use something called a THAAD, right? Right, guys? This is what they use. THAAD. THAAD stands for Thermal High Altitude Air Defense. And they also have like Patriot systems. There's a lot, okay? The thing that you need to know about the system is it's really expensive. This missile, guys, costs $1 million. $1 million. So there's this $50,000 drone coming your way, and you throw a $1 million missile at it, okay? And often these missiles miss, so you have to throw 2 or 3 missiles at it, okay? So you're spending $2 to $3 million on each $50,000 that the Iranians spend. That's kind of silly. Second thing you'll notice is that this thing is really big and really slow. And therefore, you can't really move it around. Therefore, it's pretty easy for the Iranians to spot where this is and attack it. And then when these things blow up, that's a lot of money, guys. Okay? Then you're like, what? But this makes no sense. You know the Iranians have drones. They've had drones for like 10 years. You've also seen drones used in the Russia-Ukraine war to devastating effect. Why don't the Americans know this? Why did they prepare? Okay, and again, it has to do with military doctrine. Because military doctrine determines how you fight a war, it determines on your bureaucracy, and it determines how you spend your resources, okay? And unfortunately, the Americans are used to fighting something called the Cold War, right? And the Cold War, because you can actually fight the war, you can actually use, kill each other because then people use nuclear weapons. The Cold War was about flexing. Flexing, okay? You see how big and powerful I am? Me! Okay? That's all it was. These weapon systems are designed to scare the crap out of you. They are designed to impress you. And as a result, they cost a lot of money, and they really don't do anything, all right? So that's the entire American military. It costs a lot, and it doesn't really do anything. And it's not resilient. It's not innovative. It's not open, all right? Also, the other thing I have to say this, okay, is if you look at the American military, it's corrupt. So this is really about corruption. So the Americans don't really care about winning a war. What they care about is spending as much money as possible because then they get a cut. It doesn't make sense, all right? And that's why the Americans are in the situation as they are. All right, let's continue. All right. So, something that people don't really talk about, but you need to understand, it's the water issue in the GCC, in the Middle East, in Iran. All right? So, this is a map of the world. And if you are light blue, Brazil, Canada, you have nothing to worry about because you have a lot of water, a lot of fresh water, very little population. All right? So, 100% just means 100% water stress just means that you drink as much water as the environment produces. Okay? So you want to be below 100% to be sustainable. Ideally, you want to be at 10%. Okay? If it goes above 100%, it means that you are drinking more water, using more water than the environment actually produces. Okay? So you're putting stress on the environment. So 20% is really bad, right? Because you're using twice as much water as the environment produces. Guess what, guys? Look at the Middle East, okay? Egypt, 6,420%. Saudi Arabia, 883%. All right? Bahrain, almost 4,000%. Dubai, 17,000%. All right? So water is a huge issue. Again, it doesn't matter if Iran kills American soldiers, destroys American military. It doesn't have to do that. All it has to do is destroy the desalination plants. And then the GCC is destroyed, okay? But it's also true that Iran has water issues. 72% is pretty bad. Okay? So even though the Iranians could destroy the GCC much faster than the Americans could destroy Iran, Iran is still in trouble, okay? So let me give you an example of this. This is like, so this is another map that shows you the issue of water scarcity, okay? And it's just basically the Middle East, okay? The biggest issue in the future is water, okay? And that's where the geopolitical tensions will arise in the future over water. India is also affected as well, okay? All right. All right. So let's look at the map, guys. This is called Lake Urmia in northern Iran. It's the 6th largest saltwater lake in the world, or it used to be. Okay, this is what it was in 1984. This is the shallow, this is the deep, okay? You guys see that? It's really big, right? 20 years later, guys, this is what it looks like. There's no more water here. You can walk from here over to there, okay? There's some water over here, but it's shallow now. That's how serious the water issue is in Iran. And that's the weak point that the Americans and the Israelis will attack. All right? They want to make sure that Iran has no access to fresh water, which will cause devastation in their nation. Okay, that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is this. This is a map of the different ethnic minorities in Iran. As you can see, it's a very diverse place. In the center are the Persians, but you also have 10 other groups as well. And in the borderlands, it's basically a different country, right? Like, these are basically different countries. And so these places have more common areas with their neighbors than they do with Iran. Okay, so the second weakness of Iran. The first is the water. The second is the ethnic makeup of the country. So the strategy of the Americans and the Israelis moving forward is to destroy Iran as a coherent nation state, divided into ethnic enclaves, and have them fight over water. That is the grand plan of the Israelis and the Americans, okay? All right, this is the vision where Persia is limited, and then all these other places are sponsored by the Americans and the Israelis. They're given money, they're given weapons, they're given political support, and then this war will wage over water forever, okay? And this is how you destroy Iran and make sure Iran is no longer a viable threat to you. That is the plan of the Americans. Okay? As you can see, it's a pretty evil plan. And that's why they have not announced it. Right? Because if you announce it, you're like, why are you doing this? What did the Persians, what did the Iranians ever do to you to warrant you coming and destroying their civilization? And the answer is nothing. Right? So the Americans, Israelis, will never admit they're doing this. But if you look at the map of water supply, of ethnic tensions, this is the optimal game theory strategy for them to use against Iran. Okay, does that make sense? This is a long-term plan that they have in place. And it's all moving towards this plan. But now the question then is, how can the Iranians respond to this? And the answer is this. This is a map of the Muslim world. Okay? So the light green are the Sunni people. Okay? That's 90% of the entire Muslim population, about 2 billion people. Okay? Then you have in dark green the Shia. So as you can see, the main place of the Shia is Iran. Okay? Iran is one of the few Shia nations in the world. But you can also see from this map that Shia are spread throughout the world. Okay? And so the first thing that the Iranians want to do is create a jihad to unite all the Shia against the American empire. All right? So what they want to do is create an uprising. And it's already happening, guys. The Shia in Pakistan stormed the American embassy in Pakistan, and the Americans killed a lot of people, okay? The Shia have attacked the American embassy in Iraq. The American embassy are being attacked in a lot of places, right? So the first strategy is to create an international global jihad of the Shia against the American empire. And it's already happening. It will continue for a long time because the Americans have killed the Khamenei. Okay? And that requires vengeance. The other thing, though, is that it can unify the Muslim world. Okay? If you look at this map, most of the Muslim world is actually run by dictatorships that are not popular at all, okay? And they're allowed to exist because of the American empire, right? You go to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Algeria, these places, they're all run by clients of the American empire, right? So if you rally the people who hate their governments and you overthrow them, then that makes Iran the leader of the Islamic world. Not just the Shia world, but the Islamic world. And this creates something called Pax Islamica. That is the end goal, guys. Okay? If you do that, then you don't have to worry about the Americans and the Israelis anymore. Right? So the Israeli game plan, the American game plan, is to fracture Iran into ethnic enclaves, and they'll fight over water for the rest of their lives, and they'll all die. The Iranian game plan is to create a religious war, a crusade, that unifies the Shia people, that overthrows the American empire and establishes something called the Pax Islamica. All right? All right. So, again, the key is the GCC. All right? So the game plan is this. You have to destroy the GCC. Why? Because the GCC is the linchpin of the American empire. So what the GCC does is this. It sells oil, and then for US dollars. Where does it put US dollars? It puts US dollars into the American stock market. All right, so this is investments of the UAE, okay, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait into the US financial markets. As you can see, from 2012 up to today, it's been exploding. All right? Because the US financial markets is one of the safest places where you can put your money. The intention is this. The intention is, hey, if I cut off oil and these countries no longer have access to US dollars, they're forced to spend whatever resources they have on protecting themselves, okay? And then guess what happens? The stock market collapses. The stock market collapses. The stock market is the real growth engine of the US economy. The entire US economy collapses with it. All right? There are about maybe 7 companies in America that accounts for about a quarter of stock market growth, okay? These 7 companies, of course, are AI companies. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, Apple, okay? These are the companies, and then these companies are heavily invested in by the GCC nations. So if these nations are no longer able to invest in the stock market, these companies will collapse in value. And with that, that would lead to economic depression in America. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so that is the situation for today. Today was just an overview, guys, okay? I know we covered a lot. I know there's a lot to take in, but over the next few weeks, we will explore each issue in depth and really understand what's really going on, okay? All right, so any questions, guys? Any questions about what we've just learned? Okay.
If other countries such as Italy, France, China, or Russia, they have also joined this war, like, what's the cause of they joined the war? Because of oil or those resources?
Okay. That's a good question, okay? So I don't want to spend too much time on this question because we will explore this question as we move along, okay? So the question is, what brings the world into this conflict? And the easy answer is just oil access, energy access, okay? They need to protect their energy supplies because remember, it's a very complicated situation because Europe is now fighting Russia. So Europe is not buying any oil resources, energy resources from Russia. Therefore, it depends a lot on the GCC. So the GCC is not providing them energy, then Europe will go bankrupt. Okay, so Europe needs to enter this war on behalf of the Americans. Okay, and then you have Russia, which cannot allow Iran to fall because if Iran falls, then they'll come after Russia next. All right, China is actually neutral. China's okay with either scenario. But that's just the way that the Chinese system is set up, okay? So we're gonna explore this question as we move along. But it's a very complicated issue, all right? Okay, and each nation will have its own different strategic interests to consider, right? And what we need to know, what we need to figure out is that this war in the Middle East is actually connected to the Ukraine war. And then as we move along, I'll show you how these two things connect together, okay? Any other questions, guys? Okay, great. So we'll continue this discussion on Thursday, okay?
They said don't do it, so we did it. Break the rules, now we tied in. Cross that line, now we locked in. Ain't no going back, we all in. Break the rules, now we tied in. Started small, just a little line. Just a step, just a test of mine. Heartbeat fast, felt it every time. but we crushed it. Now we feel alive. It was wrong, but it felt right. Dark turn into new light. Once you break it, you don't think twice. Now you see it from a new side. You can't go back now. You too far gone. Once you cross that, you move on. Break the rules, now we tied in. Cross that line, now we locked in. Ain't no going back, we all in. Break the rules, now we tied in. Now we share what we can't say. Secrets that don't go away. If you break it, you relate. Now we bonded by the way. That's how trust really formed. Not by safe, not by norm. It's the things you hide inside that connect you to the core. Crossed it, felt it. Now we different. That's the game, that's the code, that's the path that they chose. Break a rule, now you in, now you part of the whole. You ain't solo no more, you can't fold no more. Cause if you do, you expose. So you stay and you grow. Break the rules, now we tied in. Cross that line, now we locked in. Ain't no going back, we all in. Break the rules, now we tied in. One step, that's all it takes.
Okay, let's start class. So let us summarize and review where we are so far in the story. So there are three major interests, forces that are pushing the United States towards war with Iran. The first is the Israel lobby. Remember that the Israel lobby is composed of both Jewish interests as well as Christian interests, right? Representing the Jewish interest is something called AIPAC. And they have a membership of about 100,000. But they're very wealthy. There are many billionaires in this group. So this group has financial power. In fact, AIPAC is considered the second most powerful lobbying organization in the United States. The first is the pensioners, okay? There's about 30 million of them. And their lobbying organization is the most powerful. But AIPAC is second. But also in the Israel lobby are the Christian Zionists, right? So for example, the organization Christians United for Israel has 7 million people in its membership. So together, the Christian Zionists and AIPAC are extremely powerful force in government. And they want a war in the Middle East in order to advance Israel's interests. Also remember that America is now addicted to empire, because empire represents easy money. All money has to be channeled through the US. And so there are many people in the US who just basically make their money by speculating on money, okay? So for example, Wall Street. And that has made Wall Street extremely powerful right now in US politics. And the third force is Saudi Arabia. Remember that in our discussion of Saudi Arabia, we learned that the major conflict in the Middle East is actually not between Israel and Iran, but between Saudi Arabia and Iran. For Israel, Iran is a security threat because it supports Hezbollah and Hamas. But for Saudi Arabia, Iran represents a threat to its very existence. Okay? So Saudi Arabia must resolve the Iran problem soon. Right? Now, how these three forces manifest themselves is through Trump, okay? So basically Trump is their champion. And privately, there's a man named Jared Kushner who is Trump's son-in-law. He's married to Trump's favorite daughter, Ivanka Trump, okay? And Jared Kushner happens to be very good friends with both Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the leader of Israel, as well as Mohammed bin Salman, who is the leader of Saudi Arabia. Now, Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, was a very prominent sponsor of AIPAC. In fact, when Benjamin Netanyahu comes to stay in the United States, he lives with the Kushner family. So one night, Benjamin Netanyahu had to stay in Jared Kushner's bedroom, and Jared Kushner had to sleep in the basement. Okay, that's how close they are. And Jared Kushner is friendly with MBS, the leader of Saudi Arabia, so friendly that when Jared Kushner started a private equity fund, Saudi Arabia invested $2 billion. Okay? So through Jared Kushner, these three forces are able to exert influence on Trump. As we also discussed, it's very likely that Trump will become president of the United States again in November, and he will pick Nikki Haley as his VP. And that means that Nikki Haley will be the one in the Trump White House pushing for war against Iran. As we discussed, Nikki Haley makes most of her money from the Israel lobby, okay? The anti-Iran lobby. We know from the first Trump administration that these forces are able to exert tremendous influence on Trump, okay? And the evidence is, one, Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal that would have secured peace between the United States and Iran, okay? Trump moved the United States embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel, which was a major, which caused major friction in the Middle East, okay? We also know that Trump ignored the fact that MBS killed a journalist, okay? So we also know that Trump has been very friendly with Saudi Arabia. We also know that Trump sponsored the Abraham Accords, which is trying to bring peace between Israel and other Arab countries and unite them against Iran, okay? The last thing that Trump did, which is the most important, is that in January 2020, Trump ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, who is the leader of the who is the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Okay? So from all this, we can suspect that in a second Trump term, war with Iran will be a major priority. Okay. So is this clear so far? All right. Now, we also discussed that, okay, even though there are these forces that want war with Iran, ultimately it is the U.S. military that must implement this war. And if the U.S. military refuses to go to war, then the war can't happen. So we discussed that, unfortunately, the U.S. military is very different from what it was 30 years ago. Okay? 30 years ago, the U.S. military maintained very standard military doctrine. Okay? They maintained three very important principles that all militaries must maintain in a time of war. The first is mass forces. B is avoid encirclement, right? And the third is protect supply lines. Now, the important idea is that when you fight a war like this, okay, which is traditional warfare, you must have the consent of the public, okay? Because it is the public that sends soldiers, that provides money, that gives you political support. But in 2003, the U.S. military changed its military doctrine to one of shock and awe. Okay? And what shock and awe means is that you don't have to follow these three principles anymore. You can use air supremacy. You also have technological omniscience. And you also have special forces. And this allows you to fight wars cheaply, quickly, and decisively so that you no longer need public political support for fighting wars. And as we also discussed, this created the idea of hubris in the American military. So the American military, because of the 2003 war in Iraq, are confident they can win any war, any place, against any enemy. We know that this doctrine is actually not true. And we know because of something called Operation Prosperity Guardian. Okay? So a few months ago, the Houthis, which are a rebel group in Yemen, they started to attack ships in the Red Sea. Okay? And a lot of trade goes through the Red Sea. So the American military dispatched a massive naval force against the Houthis. Were the Americans able to defeat the Houthis? No, they were not. And so what are the Americans going to do about it? What can they do about the Houthis? What's the solution to this problem? You have these pirates, the Houthis, going around and attacking these ships, which is affecting international commerce. And that's why inflation is such a huge problem right now in the world. So what's the American military going to do about this? What can they do about this? The answer is nothing. Okay? The American military has no solution. Why? Because they don't have the forces necessary in order to undertake an operation against the Houthis. They have special forces, they have air supremacy, and they have technological omniscience, satellites, but they don't have infantry. They don't have lots and lots of ships. Therefore, they cannot stop the Houthis. Okay? And what's really important is that Joe Biden has come out and said that, yes, we know we are losing the war in the Red Sea, and yes, we know that we cannot stop the Houthis, but we are going to continue on this path. Okay? Does that make sense? And this is the idea of hubris. Not knowing your limitations. And when you are faced with your limitations, you refuse to accept your limitations. Okay? And that's why when the US military is given the order to invade Iran, they'll probably go along with it because they cannot imagine the possibility that they could be defeated in Iran. Okay? And then you have the Iran Revolutionary Corps, okay? The Revolutionary Guard. And as we discussed last class, they want war with the United States because they're very angry about U.S. interference in Iran, right? So during the Shah regime, which was a brutal police state from 1953 until 1979, the Americans were the ones who were backing this police state. So there are many who are angry about this. They're also angry about the fact that the U.S. continues to protect Israel and Saudi Arabia. Okay? And they're also angry about the fact that Trump killed General Soleimani. Okay? And as we discussed, it's possible that the Revolutionary Guard Corps killed last week the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, because he was preventing war. Okay? So they want war with the United States. So you see the map, right? You see the logic of this, where there are powerful forces in the United States pushing the United States towards war. You have Trump, who has basically agreed in his first term to raise or increase escalation with Iran. Within the Trump White House, there'll be Jared Kushner and Nikki Haley to push this war both privately and publicly. The U.S. military has so much hubris that they think they can win this war, and Iran wants to provoke the United States into invading it. Okay, and the United States and Iran can have many, so Iran has many strategies in order to provoke the United States into war. Okay, basically the United States is looking for a reason, and Iran wants to give them a reason, and that's why I think war between the United States and Iran is very likely in the next 2 to 4 years. Okay, any questions so far? Are we clear about where we are so far before I move on? Any questions? Okay, so now let's talk about the actual war. So here, most of this is speculation, okay? But I'm using speculation in order to help us better understand what a war would look like, okay? So let's pretend that it's March 2027, okay? And Trump goes on TV. He announces Operation Iranian Freedom, a full-scale U.S. invasion of Iran, along with Israel, Saudi Arabia as its main partners, but the United Kingdom, UK will be involved, Australia will be involved, UAE will be involved, Poland will be involved. Okay, so you have many countries attacking Iran together. And Trump goes on TV and explains to the American public why the United States is fighting this war. Okay, and this is what Trump says. First, he says that for the past year, there have been violent protests in Iran. You have religious protests, you have political protests, you have ethnic protests. The Iranian people are sick of the Ayatollah. They are sick of the dictatorship. They want democracy. They want freedom. And in response, the Revolutionary Guard are killing thousands of protesters. Iran is on the brink of civil war. Therefore, the United States has an obligation to protect the people of Iran. Okay? The people of Iran are praying for freedom and democracy, and the United States, the world's greatest democracy, must give them democracy. Okay? So the first reason is freedom and democracy. Second, U.S. intelligence, along with Israeli intelligence, have discovered that for the past 2 years, Iran has been working very hard on developing a nuclear bomb. In fact, Iran is only 1 month away from having 3 nuclear bombs, so that New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles could all be destroyed. Okay? So to prevent this, we must strike first to stop Iran's nuclear program. Okay? Third, Iranian proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, many groups, have been disrupting shipping in the Middle East, in both the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. 40% of the world's oil passes through that region, mainly to East Asia, China, Japan, South Korea. Our global prosperity is at stake. We must go to war to protect these shipping lanes and ensure that the oil goes to China, Japan, and South Korea so that they can continue their economic prosperity. So the United States, as the world hegemon, has a responsibility to protect global prosperity. Okay? 4, Iran has been launching attacks against our allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Hezbollah has been violently attacking Israel, killing dozens of Israelis, innocent Israelis. The Houthis have been attacking Saudi Arabia oil fields, damaging the economy. We have an obligation to protect our allies, our friends in the Middle East, okay? And the last reason is we know for a fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a sponsor of terrorism. Last week in a mall, there were gunmen who went and killed 107 people. Our intelligence says that it was most definitely an Iranian operation. Okay? So for these 5 reasons, we have decided to invade Iran. But don't worry, this invasion will be successful because we have a lot of allies. The UK, Israel, Saudi Arabia, all friends will be part of this operation. Our special forces are already in the country looking for their air bases and their missiles. We can knock them out at the beginning of the war. Also, we have been in contact with Iranian opposition groups. They want to overthrow the regime. And when we help them, they will install democracy in the country. Our American military is the greatest in the world. In 1991, our military defeated Saddam Hussein in 100 hours. In 2003, our military defeated Saddam Hussein in less than 3 weeks. To prove that we are the greatest in the world, we will defeat Iran in only 2 weeks. So do not worry. We will be strong in protecting democracy, freedom, and global prosperity. Okay? So that's what Donald Trump will say to the people of the United States. Okay? And of course, you're going to have large-scale protests throughout the country opposing this war. But most people in the country will support this war. Okay? All right. So after this speech, the operation is launched. And on TV, we'll watch this on TV and the internet together, on YouTube together, okay? And we'll be so impressed by the power of the US military. This is Iran. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia. Israel is here. Red Sea is here. Iraq is here. Okay? So, in the Strait of Hormuz comes the USS Gerald R. Ford. It's a $13 billion super carrier. Okay? This thing is designed to destroy countries. It is now prowling the Strait of Hormuz to ensure that shipping is safe. America establishes air supremacy very quickly, okay? Meaning that it has complete control over the skies. Nothing can move in the skies without America detection, okay? And then a massive invasion force is sent to Iran in the south. 100,000 US troops land. Maybe 200,000 Saudi Arabia troops land, okay? Maybe you have 300,000 to 500,000 troops in Iran. And they are about to strike Tehran in the north, okay? So in the south, the United States and its allies have established a foothold. They have a huge presence in the country, and they're about to attack Tehran, okay? All right. Do you understand what has happened? Okay. Now I want to ask you this question. At this point, I think the war has been decided. Who has won the war? America has established air supremacy. It controls the skies. U.S. Navy controls the seas. You have 100,000 U.S. troops in country ready to strike Tehran. The war has been decided. Who has won the war? Okay, obviously this is a trick question. Obviously Iran has won the war. Why? Why? What's the problem with this plan? Okay? This is typical American doctrine, shock and awe. This is how they fight wars. But there's a problem with this plan. What is it? Why would the Iranians want this?
Maybe like when they occupied the South, no one was in the South.
Okay, let's go back to traditional military doctrine, okay? In traditional military doctrine, you have three principles, right? Mass forces, avoid encirclement, protect supply lines, okay? These are three things you must absolutely obey if you are going to war, okay? So using traditional military doctrine, explain to me why the United States has lost the war right now. Exactly. First of all, they're encircled, okay? Do you know why? Because Iran are all mountains. It's a fortress, okay? Meaning that to get these troops into the country, you have to airdrop them, right? But guys, once you're in the country, you can't get them out of the country. You understand? Okay, so that's the first problem. They've been encircled, right? What's the second problem?
They can't actually go north.
Why not?
Like it's too heavily defended because of all the mountains.
That's right. And why else?
And like it's very hard to move like tanks and equipment through mountains.
Yeah, that's right, okay? So they failed to mass forces, okay? Iran is a population of 90 million people. You will need at least 3 to 4 million soldiers to even think about conquering the country. They've got 100,000 in this country, okay? And as Jack says, you can't move tanks through mountains. They're not designed for mountain warfare. What are you going to do? Okay? So they can't mass forces, and they've been encircled, and what else is a problem? And this is the biggest problem.
They cannot have supply.
Exactly. They cannot be resupplied, okay? They have no supply lines. For them to be resupplied, airplanes have to drop ammunition, food, into the country. But again, Iran is all mountains. So it's very easy for Iranians to shoot down the airplanes. Does that make sense? When you pass through mountains, you can't see what's on the ground. A random guy with a rocket launcher can just shoot down the helicopter, okay? Which is what the Afghans did against the Soviets in the Afghanistan war. And that's why the Soviets lost the war. A drone can take down any airplanes, okay? So, in other words, these guys are trapped. You think they're soldiers, but they're not. What they really are hostages. Okay? Does that make sense? You have too many people in the country, so you can't get them out of the country, but you don't have enough people to actually launch a strike against Tehran. You can't resupply them. And they've been encircled by Iranian forces. All right? Does that make sense? Okay? Okay. Now, the logic of having 100,000 US troops in the country is that once in the country, all the resistance to the regime will rise up and strike against Tehran. The Iranian army will mutiny against the country. Okay? That's the hope. Why do we think this won't happen? Why won't the Iranians revolt against their government? Why don't they want to revolt? That's right. Okay, so Iranians hate Americans. Okay, remember that Iranians remember the Shah. From 1953 until 1979, the Shah, the American-supported Shah, was running a brutal police state. So brutal that everyone in Iran revolted against the regime. Okay, that's number one. Why else would the Iranians not support the Americans? Why? That's the first reason. Iran has a bad history with America. Why else? Guys, which country is next door? What happened in Iraq? America destroyed Iraq, right? From 2003 into 2011, America was there destroying the country. America said that it would bring freedom, democracy. It would bring prosperity. It would bring wealth. But instead, it just destroyed the country. American soldiers were running into houses every night, pointing guns at children, destroying homes, and arresting men for no reason, okay? Iranians saw all this on TV. They heard about all this from neighbors, okay? So they know that if America comes, it's to destroy the country, not to bring freedom, democracy, not to bring prosperity, it's to destroy the country. That's why they're going to fight, okay? And another reason is that Iranians think that they belong to a great civilization. So they value their freedom and independence. Okay, does that make sense? They're not going to submit to a foreign conqueror. So, why else would the Iranians resist? Okay. Also religion, right? The Iranians are religious. They believe that America is Satan, and they have a duty, a religious obligation to fight Satan, okay? So for many reasons, there's just no way that Iranian people are going to stand with America. You might have a minority, but most are going to resist, okay? Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, any questions so far?
Why do the Americans think that they will rise up with them?
Okay, so that's a great question. Why would the Americans think that the Iranian people will rise up? And the answer is that they need to justify the invasion. Okay, does that make sense? They have to have a logical explanation for why this invasion will succeed. Because one of the criticisms against them will be like, you need 4 million people to invade Iran. They don't have 4 million soldiers. They have at most 1 million soldiers, okay, total throughout the world. They have about 60,000 in the Middle East. So they can't get 1 million soldiers. So their only explanation is, okay, well, we're going to pretend that once we invade, the people of Iran will support us. Do you understand? So it's not based on truth, but it's a explanation for why the invasion will succeed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that was like what they tell the public, but do they actually believe it?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so that's their propaganda. But do they actually believe this? And the answer is hubris, okay? They do believe this because they have hubris. And again, it's hard because we're not in their position. But once you're in that position where you have access to nuclear weapons, when you can kill anyone in the world, when you can see everything in the world, it makes you think you're God. Okay? And we remember, like last semester, we were reading the Greeks. And the Greeks believe the worst thing is hubris. Because it makes you think you're God. But you're not God. And you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you think you're God. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Any more questions?
And why do the U.S. think that Iran will use their nuclear bomb if they create one? Because many countries have nuclear bombs.
Okay. So, Trump says that Iran is 1 month from developing a nuclear bomb, right? America has been saying this for the past 10 years. Okay? You just Google this, and America's like, oh, Iran is only 1 month away from a nuclear bomb. They've been saying this for the past 10 years. So, do you understand? When Trump gives his speech, there's absolutely no evidence that any of this is true, okay? But this is how he'll explain the invasion. Okay? All right? And chances are that even if Tehran possess a nuclear bomb, they won't use it. Why not?
That gives America a reason to use its bomb.
That's right. The reality is that there's only one way that America can win this war against Iran, okay? They can just nuke the country. And America will do that if it has enough, if it has a pretext, okay? So nuclear weapons is something that Iran is very afraid of, okay? So does it make sense? All right. So this becomes, so American soldiers are trapped in this country. Okay? So now the question then is, wait a minute here. Why would America do something so stupid as send 100,000 soldiers into the country for no reason and get them trapped? Okay? So that's a question. And what I want to do now is make you the argument that there are two ways that we can prove or provide evidence that this is true, okay? The first is historical analysis. Historical analysis means that are there historical examples like this? Okay? Are there historical analogs? If there are, then this could be true, okay? The second method is through game theory analysis. Why would the actors who are rational do something as stupid as trap 100,000 American soldiers in Iran? All right? So we'll first do historical analysis to find historical analogs, examples, sort of similar to this. And then we'll look at game theory to try to reason out the motivation of the actors. Okay? So let's first look at game theory. Oh, sorry. Let's first look at historical analysis. Okay. So the year is 415 BCE, okay, in Athens. Remember that we studied Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War, last semester, okay? So we will now discuss the Peloponnesian War. The year is 415 BCE. And for the past 17 years, Athens have been fighting a brutal war against Sparta, okay? It's a stalemate. And then for whatever reason, a man named Alcibiades, okay, has a suggestion. Okay, and his suggestion is to win the war against Sparta, let's go invade Sicily. And Nicias, his opponent, is like, why the hell would we want to invade Sicily? It's far away. And Alcibiades is like, well, because it has a lot of money. And if we invade the country, we can take their money. Okay? And it turned out, by making this argument, the people of Athens really support this argument, okay? Because the reason why is war was costing them a lot of money. And they become addicted to the easy money of empire, okay? So they wanted to fight this war. So Nicias has this great idea of how to convince people not to go to war, okay? And what he says to the people is, okay, guys, I know you want to fight this war. I know that you think this war is a good idea, but Sicily is a huge place. It has a navy. Therefore, we need a massive expedition force against Syracuse and Sicily, okay? We need at least 5,000 soldiers. That's a lot, okay? Because the total Athenian population is about 50,000 people, okay? 5,000 soldiers is a lot for Athens. And we need about 100 ships. And the idea is Nicias is trying to scare people into not agreeing to not fight, okay? That's the idea. The Athenians say, that's a great idea. Let's send a massive force against Sicily and Syracuse so the war can be won just like that, okay? Shock and awe. So the problem, though, is that never before in its history has Athens sent a large expedition force against another power. Okay, does that make sense? When the Persians invaded, they were invading Athens. Athens didn't go invade Persia. So when you have sent a massive expedition force against another country, what is your number one problem? What is the thing that you must resolve? But the Athenians didn't really think about it because they had absolutely no experience in fighting a foreign war. Okay, so the enemy knows the terrain better than you do, okay? But there's actually a much bigger problem than that. And it is what?
How do you supply the soldiers?
Okay, the biggest problem is resupply. And this is something that the Athenians didn't think about because they never thought, they never fought a war like this before, okay? So they sent this huge expedition against Sicily. And Syracuse, which was a naval power, were surprised because they were like, why would the Athenians want to invade us, okay? So for the first year, the Athenians were destroying the Syracuse army. And the Syracuse army had to retreat back into their city, okay? And so the Athenians laid siege to the city. Okay, the Athenians, Syracuse is here, the Athenians are here. And the Athenians control the sea, right? Okay? So this situation is very similar to this situation, okay? Do you understand? But then what happened was that the Athenians couldn't resupply themselves. And the reason why is Syracuse also had a navy, and they could stop the Athenian navy from resupplying the Athenian troops. And therefore, the Athenian army was wiped out in Sicily. And this caused the Athenians to ultimately lose the war against Sparta, and it caused the Athenian Empire to collapse. Okay? Do you understand? And again, historians have been trying to figure out for a long time why the Athenians would do such a stupid thing as to send a huge army against Syracuse. Because the risk of failure was catastrophic. Okay? And the only answer is, well, the Athenians had hubris, okay? They never really lost the war, and they had become addicted to empire, which is the same situation America finds itself in today. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right? So this has happened before in history, when the Athenians invaded Sicily and lost to Syracuse. Their entire army was wiped out in Syracuse, okay? Because they couldn't resupply their army. Does that make sense? All right. The second example we can look at is the Vietnam War. So in the beginning of 1960, okay, in the beginning of the decade, most Americans have never heard of a country called Vietnam. Okay? Most Americans didn't know what it was, didn't know where it was, okay? By the end of the decade, in 1969, 500,000 American soldiers were in the country, destroying everything, okay? But also getting destroyed themselves. 58,000 US soldiers died in Vietnam. So the question then is, how did this happen? Why would this happen? 1960, Vietnam was a distant country no one's ever heard of. By the end of the decade, 500,000 US soldiers were in country fighting this war against an enemy they really didn't know. Okay? In 1971, the Pentagon Papers came out. And the Pentagon Papers was a history of America's involvement in the Vietnam War dating back to the 1950s, okay? And it made three major points. The first point is that American leadership, military leadership, has been expanding the war in Vietnam without public knowledge, okay? This is what we call mission creep. So maybe at first they sent some observers to the country, then they sent some advisors, then trainers, then soldiers, okay? So mission creep. Slowly over time, things escalate. And you don't really understand why things escalate, but they do, okay? Second point is that American leadership, from very early on, knew the war was unwinnable. This was the greatest military in the world. They dropped more bombs in Vietnam in the 60s than all bombs were dropped in World War II, okay? And they could not win the war. And the reason why is, to win a war, you have to solve three problems, okay? Okay? The first problem is clear strategy, okay? What are you trying to accomplish in this country? What are your clear military objectives, okay? Second is, you must adapt to the battlefield, okay? Because all your best plans will change over the course of a battle, okay? So the adversary that is most willing to adapt to the battlefield will win, okay? And the third thing is the will to fight. So if you want to look at a war and who's most likely to win the war, you ask these three questions. One, does this guy have clear military objectives that everyone understands? Because that will determine strategy, okay? Second is this guy adapting to the battlefield? And the third is this guy, does this guy still have the will to fight? If the answer is yes to all three questions, then the person will most likely win the war. Okay, and if you look at the Vietnam War, even though America was killing a lot of people, it killed 3 million Vietnamese during the course of the war. It was not destroying the enemy's will to fight. In fact, it was making them angrier. And therefore, more people were willing to fight the Americans. Okay? So, very early on, the American political leadership knew the war could not be won. So then the question then is, why did America stay in the war? And the answer is credibility. Okay? Credibility just means they didn't want to lose face. They didn't want to be laughed at by the Chinese and by the Soviets and by the Europeans, okay? But there's actually another way to understand credibility, and it's what we call the sunk cost fallacy. Okay? Have you guys heard of the sunk cost fallacy? Okay, and the idea is never ever go into a casino. The reason why is that when you go into a casino and you start losing money, at some point you cannot leave the casino. Why not?
You feel like you've lost so much, so now you have to make it back.
Exactly. You want to reclaim the money you've lost, okay? You've invested so much that you cannot leave. You have to get that money back. And that's the problem with war. Eventually, you've invested so much, you cannot leave the war. And that's what happened in Vietnam. America invested so much, it didn't want to leave the war because it did not want to admit that all this has been lost. Okay? It's what we call the sunk cost fallacy. And that's why, even though America could not win the war, it still wanted to fight the war. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So the Vietnam War is another example, okay, that is similar to this, where America invests enough soldiers that it refuses to leave the war and admit defeat, okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right. Now, let's look at one more example. And this is the most recent example, and it's the Russian-Ukraine war. Now, as you know, in February 2022, Putin ordered a special military operation against Ukraine. Okay? And this is Ukraine. And Russia attacked from three axes. Okay? The north to take Kiev, the capital. You have the east to take Donetsk. And then you have the south from Crimea to take the south. Okay? And as we know, the north failed. Okay? The north attack failed and the Russians had to turn back. But the east and the south were successful, okay? Now, let's think about this. You have an extremely powerful military attacking your country, the Ukraine. If you were the Ukrainian president, if you were the Ukrainian military, there's really only one way you can fight this war and win. And what is it? Using traditional military doctrine. How must you fight this war? You guys know? Let's go back to mass forces, avoid encirclement, protect supply lines. How must you fight this war? There's only one way you can fight this war. Excuse me? How do you disrupt supply lines? There's only one way you can fight this war and win. And what is it? The enemy is attacking you, right? So what must you do? Okay, the answer is you must retreat. Okay? Why? The enemy is attacking, right? So you pull back your forces. Why would you do that? What's the logic of that?
Because then they have longer supply lines.
Exactly, okay? It's that simple, okay? You want to overextend your enemy. Ukraine is a huge country, right? And Russia didn't send out that many soldiers, maybe 160,000. That's not that many soldiers. So if you just give them space, they're going to outrun the supply lines, okay? And then when they outrun the supply lines, you can encircle them and you can disrupt their supply. And that's the only way you can win the war, okay? What did the Ukrainians do instead? That's the only way to win this war. But what did the Ukrainians do instead, which made them lose the war? Yeah, so the Ukrainians refused to give up space, okay? They refused to give up land. They want to fight the Russians for every inch of territory. And eventually, because the Russians had more forces, mass forces, they were able to push through, okay? So that's the first major mistake that Ukraine made. But then last summer, Ukraine launched something called a counteroffensive, right? So once Russia was able to take space, because Russia is a land army, it started to develop fortifications, defenses, okay? Mainly artillery. And had 3 lines of defenses. And in the summer offensive, the Ukrainian military, for whatever reason, sent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers against this artillery, and the Russians blew everyone up, okay? Now, here's a question. Why are the Ukrainians doing this? They've lost the war now, right? They have no more soldiers. Right now, the average age of the Ukrainian army is over 40 years old. They have guys in their 60s and 70s fighting in the military. They don't have enough manpower. The war is lost. Why would the Ukrainians do this? First of all, why would they fight for every inch of territory? And why would they launch a counteroffensive against a superior enemy? What's the problem? Okay, the first is the president, Zelensky, the guy's a TV actor, okay? Which means that he doesn't think strategy, he just thinks what looks good on TV. So for the first 2 years of the war, we're watching this on TV, right? And it looked as though the Ukrainians were going to win this war, right? I remember like 2 years ago, people were saying that the Ukrainians are going to march to Moscow and overthrow Putin. People were saying that, okay? And the reason why is that Zelensky is a master of public image manipulation, okay? He was distorting reality for people through television. The problem with that, though, is it's not reality, guys, okay? The reality on the ground is very different from TV, okay? So who else is like Zelensky in this world? Trump is exactly like Zelensky, okay? Do you understand? Trump is also concerned about what looks good on TV. He's like, I must look strong. We must look as though we're winning this war. He doesn't really care about strategy, okay? So, because of this, it's very likely that he orders a land invasion of Iran because it would look good on TV, okay? So, the problem with Zelensky is he cared about what looked good as opposed to actually what actually worked, okay? But you also have other problems, like you have extremists in the Ukrainian military, okay? And guys, these extremists, they're Nazis, they're neo-Nazis. And so the traditional understanding of Nazis are people who kill Jews, okay? But the Russians don't understand Nazis that way because remember, Germany and the Soviet Union fought this war. So the Russians understood Nazis to be enemies of Russia who want to kill Russians. And there were many neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They hate Russia. They want to kill as many Russians as possible. Okay? And they're the ones who are pushing for as much war as possible. Okay? So you have these extremists in the Ukrainian military. Okay? The last reason is NATO. So it's an open secret that NATO is helping the Ukrainian military against Russia. You have NATO military advisors devising strategy against Russia. Okay, so it's most likely that the summer offensive last summer was a NATO plan and not a Ukrainian plan. It's possible. We also know that NATO special forces are in the country directing missile strikes against Russian forces, okay? Which means what? If this is true, and if Ukraine loses the war, meaning that it doesn't have enough soldiers to continue to fight this war, what will NATO do? Yeah. I mean, according to what happened to Vietnam War and the Athenian expedition against Sicily, it is most likely that the most likely outcome will be that NATO sends its own troops against Russia. Okay, so Macron of France have said that we want to send French soldiers, and the British Prime Minister has said that he is considering conscription for British people. Okay? Which means that young British citizens will be drafted into the army to fight Russia. All right? So these are three historical examples that are very similar to what could happen in Iran. Okay, does that make sense, guys? All right, any questions before I continue? All right, is this clear so far? All right, now let's use another mode of analysis called game theory analysis, okay? And this is what I've been teaching you this semester. And the idea is that society, what happens in the real world, is a game among human beings. Okay, and each person is trying to play this game as to optimize the outcome for that person. Okay, so the question then is, why would the United States send 100,000 troops into Iran? So let's look at the individual motivations of the individual players, okay? So you have the United States. What does the United States want to do? What does it want to do? By doing what? And accomplishing what? It wants to topple the regime in Tehran, right? And you can only do that through a ground invasion, okay? So the United States is trying to topple Iran. But then you also have other actors, okay? So Iran. What does Iran want to do? What does Iran want to do? Or basically the Revolutionary Guard Corps. What do they want to do? Right? They want to kill as many Americans as possible, okay? Do you understand? They want to force an American land invasion, okay? So Iran wants to force a U.S. invasion, knowing that if the U.S. invades, it has to lose the war, okay? It will lose the war because the Revolutionary Guard can just send suicide bombers against the United States, okay? Now let's look at Israel. Okay? We know that the United States wants to topple Iran. We know that Iran wants to force a U.S. invasion to defeat the Americans, to humiliate the Americans, and exact revenge for what happened in the past. Okay? What does Israel want to do? What is Israel's optimal outcome? Do you guys know? If you're Israel, what do you want to happen? Okay, so you want Iran defeated, okay? And then what do you want to happen? You want Iran defeated, you want the proxies defeated, and then what do you want to happen? Do you want the United States to stay in the Middle East? What happens if the United States and Iran both lose the war? I mean, Iran is destroyed as a country, the United States is destroyed as a military presence in the Middle East. What would happen? Israel becomes the top dog in the Middle East. Do you understand? Okay? Israel can now control the entire Middle East. So the optimal outcome for Israel is Iran and the United States are both destroyed. Okay? Do you understand? How about Saudi Arabia, what is their optimal outcome? Exactly the same as Israel. Exactly. Okay. Do you understand? Okay. Which will leave the Middle East to Saudi Arabia and Israel, but Israel is a far superior military than Saudi Arabia. Okay. Remember, it's very easy to blow up Saudi Arabia. They have oil fields. Okay. Not that easy to blow up Israel. So Israel becomes a top dog. Do you understand game theory? In other words, all the major participants want an invasion of Iran. Okay? But they want different outcomes. And Saudi Arabia and Israel most benefit if this situation happens, where you have 100,000 US troops in the country and they can't get out, okay? Because it becomes sunk cost fallacy. The United States can only pour in more soldiers. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So is this clear to you guys? Okay? You can either use historical analysis to get to this outcome, but you can also use game theory to get to this outcome. Any questions so far?
Under what circumstances will the US use nuclear bomb?
Okay, great, okay. So Celine asked the most pivotal question, okay? The United States has nuclear weapons, which is its ultimate trump card, right? So what Trump can say to Tehran is like, I have 100,000 troops in the country. You have to let them go or I will nuke you, okay? Do you understand? Trump can say that. Listen, I'm Trump. I'm Donald Trump. I need to look strong. I have 100,000 troops in the country. I can't get them out of the country. So he says to Tehran, you either let them go, okay? You either guarantee him safe passage out of the country or I will nuke you. Right? So that's what will happen. That is what Donald Trump will do. Once the situation arises, the only way for Donald Trump to save face is to threaten Tehran and says, you either let my guys go or I will nuke the entire country. Right? So, how does Tehran get out of this situation? How do the Iranians protect themselves against this possibility? Because you're absolutely right. This is exactly what will happen if this situation will arise. Trump will respond with nuclear weapons, or the threat of nuclear weapons. So what must the Iranians do to protect themselves against this possibility? Who can help the Iranians now? Russia. Okay, do you understand? So before this war happens, Iran and Russia must come to an agreement where Putin says from the onset, no one is allowed to use nuclear weapons. Okay? If Iran uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke Iran. If the United States uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke the United States. If Israel uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke Israel. Okay? If Putin says that, how will the world react? If Putin says this, you are not allowed to use nuclear weapons, how will the world react? He's a hero, right? He saved humanity. But because he says this, the United States is now trapped. Okay? You understand? And so this becomes a black hole for the United States, where they can only send in more troops. They can't get any troops out. They can only send in more troops. What's the problem with this? What's the problem with sending in more troops? No, there's actually a huge problem with this idea of sending in more troops. What is it? Okay, you can't, no one wants to go fight. You understand? The military cannot recruit soldiers. All right? But even if you did have enough troops, as Jack says, you can't resupply them. Why? Why can't you actually resupply your army? Why not? But there's a bigger problem than the supply lines. What is it? What do you need to create bullets and ammunition? America has no manufacturing capacity because America moved all its manufacturing capacity to China. Okay? Remember this. So for every one ship that America can build, China can build 232 ships. That's what the Pentagon says. Okay, do you understand? So if this war if this war were to happen, there's absolutely no way America can win this war. It's just completely trapped inside Iran. And once it becomes trapped, some cost fallacy comes into play, and America just puts in all of its resources into the country, but it's a black hole. Okay? It cannot use nuclear weapons because Putin has said from the onset, you are not allowed to use nuclear weapons. All right? But now the question then is, why would Putin do that? Right? Why would Putin involve himself in this war? And that's what we'll discuss next class. All right? How Putin sees this war and how Putin will react in this war. Okay? But before we end, are there any questions about any of this? Does this make sense to you guys? Is this clear? Any questions?
Like, is it possible for the United States to invade Iran to Iraq? Like, have they sent an army to?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So the problem with Iraq is that Iraq is an independent country. Do you understand? There are 10,000 American soldiers in Iraq. So you would need their permission. Even if you had their permission, there's a problem here because there are lots of Shia militiamen in Iraq who are loyal to Iran. Okay, and they would see the American invasion force as an opportunity to attack the Americans. Okay, because they're still angry about the Americans for what happened in Iraq. But even if they could have a staging area in Iraq, they still have to deal with mountains. Okay, do you understand? All right. I mean, the problem is you have 100,000 troops in the country. You have to get out of the country. Okay, and it's very hard to get them out of the country. If you go for the mountains, you're gonna get an ambush in the mountains. If you go for the air, those drones are gonna strike you down. That's the issue. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions? Okay, great. So on Friday we'll talk about Putin. Okay.
Yeah, I ain't even sleep yet. Big Jimmy Major, 36 calls, same time every night. I don't even pick up, but it don't feel right. Numbers keep repeating, like they tryna talk to me. 33 keep calling, I think I'm waking up. Yeah. Late night, room dark, phone light, eyes low but I don't feel tired. I'm racing something, feel off, like I'm living two lives. Yeah, used to think it's just me, now I see it too clear. Every time I ignore it, it come back right here. Same number, same time, same feeling inside. Like something tryna reach me, but I don't know why. They don't see it, I cannot see it. Don't leave me, I just feel it. It's cold, same time every night. I don't even pick up, but it don't feel right. Numbers keep repeating, like they tryna talk to me. 33 keep calling, I think I'm waking up. I've been losing sleep again, thoughts running deep again. Every time I try to rest, some pull me back again. Clock say 3:33, every night is finding me. Maybe it's coincidence, or it's more than I can see. I don't even tell nobody, they gon' say I'm tripping probably, but I know what I've been seeing. This ain't random, this a pattern. No sound, still loud. No voice, still call. Why me? Why me? Why now? Why this? Why now? Yeah, I don't run, I just sit. I don't speak, I just feel. If it's all in my head, why it feels so real? 33 missed calls, anytime, every night. I don't even pick up, don't answer right. Numbers keep repeating, like they tryna talk to me. 33 and call it, I think I'm waking up. Yeah, you see it too, you do. Don't ignore.